Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee do now rise.
Mr. Kurz, on the motion, the committee do now rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed no. The ayes have it. The committee rises.
Mr. Chairman, the chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 658 and has come to no resolution thereon. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 194, resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 1255, to prevent a shutdown of the government of the United States and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from West Virginia seek recognition?
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute for the purpose of making an announcement.
The gentlelady from West Virginia will state her request first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent that Mrs. Elmers of North Carolina be removed as a co-sponsor from H.R. 1081.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the purpose of making an announcement.
Without objection, the House will be in order.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Rules is scheduled to meet the week of April 4th to grant a rule which could limit the amendment process for floor consideration of H.R. 910, the Energy Tax Prevention Act of 2011. Any member wishing to offer an amendment must submit an electronic copy of the amendment and a description via the Rules Committee website. Members must also submit 30 hard copies of the amendment, one copy of a brief explanation of the amendment, and an amendment login form to the Rules Committee in room H312 of the Capitol by 10 a.m. on Tuesday, April 5th, 2011. Both electronic and hard copies must be received by that date and time. Members should draft their amendment to the text of the bills as ordered reported by the Committee on Energy and Commerce, which are available on the Rules Committee website. Members should use the Office of Legislative Counsel to ensure that their amendments are drafted in the most appropriate format, and members should also check with the Office of the Parliamentarian, the Committee on Budget, and the Congressional Budget Office to be certain their amendments comply with the rules of the House and the Congressional Budget Act. If you have any questions, Mr. Speaker, I'd encourage members to contact me or members of the Rules Committee staff. Thank you.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union and for further consideration of H.R. 658. Will the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Simpson, kindly resume the chair?
Committee will be in order. The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 658, which the clerk will report by title.
Bill to amend Title 49, United States Code, to authorize appropriations for the Federal Aviation Administration for fiscal years 2011 through 2014 to streamline programs, create efficiencies, reduce waste, and improve aviation safety and capacity, to provide stable funding for the national aviation system and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, amendment number 18, printed in House Report 112-46, offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey, had been disposed of. Committee will be in order. It is now in order to consider amendment number 19, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 19, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Graves of Missouri.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd first like to start off by saying that I appreciate the Rules Committee making this amendment in order. And while I'm going to withdraw the amendment, I think it's very important to talk about this because it's a very important aspect of the
Committee will be in order. Please remove your conversations from the floor. Gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as I was saying, this amendment is a very important aspect of the Interstate Commerce Act. In 1994, just to give you a little bit of background, in 1994 when we were doing the FAA reauthorization bill, Congress recognized the importance of airports to interstate commerce and enacted legislation to prevent state and local governments from imposing discriminatory taxes on airport users to fund local projects unrelated to airport infrastructure improvement, maintenance, or operations. However, for nearly 20 years, state and local governments have taken advantage of a loophole by applying the burden of the tax not only to airport users, but all similar entities within that taxing jurisdiction. This has allowed state and local governments to completely circumvent the intent of Congress and levy discriminatory taxes against interstate travelers, in particular rental car customers. The intent of the 1994 law is very clear. Targeted taxes imposed at airports are to be used at airports for airport-related projects, and we must continue to allow state and local governments from circumventing these restrictions. Right now, Mr. Chairman, I would yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. I appreciate your yielding time, and I appreciate your bringing this amendment, and I rise in strong support of the concept and the amendment, although I know it's going to be withdrawn. The concept is important, and we need to address this issue in this Congress. This amendment would address the growing crisis of discriminatory taxes placed on rental car transactions. I don't need to tell my colleagues how frustrating it is to go and rent a car and see huge taxes on your bill. Taxes put on your bill by legislative bodies that you don't get a right to vote on most of the time and that you don't get to vote on. And it's a simple thing for people to do. It's cheap taxes for state and local officials to let tourists pay their taxes for their sports arenas and their other facilities. Don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax that guy behind that tree. And that's not the kind of tax philosophy we should encourage, and we should make our state and local officials do taxation in the proper manner in which it's supposed to be, with either property taxes or sales taxes or income taxes, but not these type of taxes that discriminate. And my jurisdictions have done it as well, but it doesn't make it right. Rental car taxes target air travelers, but they also hurt low-income people that don't own cars and must rent instead. The 94 FAA reauthorization bill included the provision to prevent taxes targeting air travelers to pay for projects that have nothing to do with air traffic. But state and local governments have exploited a loophole and raised billions of dollars through these taxes. Since 1990, more than 117 discriminatory rental car excise taxes have been enacted in 43 states and the District of Columbia. I was in the Tennessee legislature for 24 years, and we did our share. I tried to oppose some of them. It's wrong, and we need to act. So I urge support for the amendment when it comes back up. I thank Congressman Graves for his work on the issue, and I look forward to working with him in the future to see this become a law in our nation. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Missouri, reserve the balance of his time.
I'd reserve the balance of my time.
I rise in opposition.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I do rise in opposition to the amendment, and the gentleman, both the gentleman from Tennessee, distinguished gentleman from Missouri, have raised some excellent points about excessive fees. Some of the unsuspecting renters are forced to pay sometimes, and when you rent a car, sometimes the fees look like more than the car rental. But many of the communities and airports are committed to building facilities. They make those decisions through elected local and state bodies, and we have to recognize some of their independence. I appreciate the goal of the gentleman in this amendment. I believe he's going to withdraw it, but I do pledge to work with him to see how we can put some limitations in the future that are reasonable and not impair the proper development, and also taking the burden off taxpayers for improvement that someone who comes in and rents a car experiences. A lot of local taxpayers end up footing some of the bill for the convenience that are accorded some of these visitors and car renters. So we need to seek a proper balance and pledge to work with the gentleman in that regard, both Mr. Graves and Mr. Cohen. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Missouri has 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in closing, I want to thank the Rules Committee for making this amendment in order, and I very much want to thank the Chairman for his willingness to work with us on this issue in the future, and I look forward to that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll withdraw my amendment.
Without objection, the gentleman's amendment is withdrawn. It is now in order to consider amendment number 20, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 20, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Sessions of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my amendment would prevent any funding within the FAA Reauthorization and Reform Act of 2011 to be used to administer or enforce the Davis-Bacon wage rate requirements with respect to any project or program in the underlying text or amendment adopted today. Since the Davis-Bacon Act was signed into law in 1931, labor rates for government contracts have been inflated significantly, affecting the cost of administrative expenditure for those awarded projects. Unfortunately, the Davis-Bacon requirement has inadvertently caused the government to pass higher costs on to the American taxpayers, often costing 5 to 38% more than the project would have cost in the private sector, according to the Associated Building Contractors. The Congressional Budget Office has stated that the Davis-Bacon Act has cost our government more than $9.5 billion from 2002 to 2011. I say enough is enough. We must reevaluate and look at what we're doing that costs more money for the government and ultimately the taxpayers. We must stop passing this financial burden on the backs of hardworking American taxpayers. This year alone, the Heritage Foundation has estimated that the Davis-Bacon Act will add more than $10.9 billion to our already burdensome national debt. The American people sent a strong message to Congress in the last election, and that it was time to rein in out-of-control government spending. Congress can ensure their voices are heard by voting yes on this common-sense amendment today. In 2009, the Public Policy Foundation of West Virginia released a study stating that as many as 1,500 construction jobs could have been created if these wage regulations were repealed or reformed to reflect actual market-based wages. During our current economic times, as tough as they are that this nation is facing, we need to make sure that it is easier for the private sector to create jobs for the unemployed, not to hinder job growth. Davis-Bacon requirements undercut and undermine the hard work of small business owners because of the time-consuming and costly requirements of Davis-Bacon. Businesses have constantly expressed frustration over the difficulty of complying with wage rules of Davis-Bacon. As a result, large and often unionized companies have been awarded more government contracts that come at a higher price to taxpayers. I urge all my colleagues to support this amendment that ensures small and large businesses have the ability to compete for all government contracts while saving the American taxpayers tens of billions of dollars. Mr. Chairman, this is exactly what the American people want and need, a better deal in the marketplace. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia rise?
In vehement opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, here we go again. The majority is continuing what started out in some of the states this year and has been going on with more vehemency in this body. Their continued attack on collective bargaining rights of workers. They're continuing to blame the workers of this country for the economic ills. I think it's worth noting the gentleman from Texas just noted the trouble the people have had complying with Davis-Bacon over the years. It's been around since 1931 when 2 Republicans by the name of Davis and Bacon instituted the Davis-Bacon law. And study after study has shown that despite the opponent's claims, the Davis-Bacon Act has had little or no effect on the total costs of federally assisted construction projects. In fact, there's a study that shows that the high-wage states actually attract more productive, effective, highly skilled, and safe workers, making the cost per mile of highway construction actually cheaper in high-wage states than in low-wage states. It's important to note as well that here we are in an economic recovery. And these Republican continued attacks on our workers of this country at a time that we're slowly, however slowly, pulling out of a recession and entering a recovery does not make any sense at all. So I would urge my colleagues to oppose this continued attack on the workers' rights of this country, and I yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Costello.
Gentleman from Illinois.
I thank the ranking member for
3.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to my friend's amendment from Texas. As Mr. Rahal just stated, for nearly 80 years, the Davis-Bacon Act guaranteed fairness in wages and conditions for Americans who serve the public good and perform public works for the federal government. At a time when so many Americans are out of work and under financial stress, this amendment would strip away workers' rights to just compensation for their labor that directly benefits all of us by keeping aviation infrastructure across the nation working safely. Further, the amendment would likely make it difficult for FAA contractors to find skilled workers who have the expertise necessary to perform work on complicated safety-critical facilities and equipment. Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the gentleman's amendment, and I yield back the balance, or I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, at this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Georgia, the gentleman, Mr. Gingrich.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman for yielding. It is just absolutely astonishing to me that my colleagues on the other side of this issue could stand up on the floor of this House and talk about jobs when Davis-Bacon wages that they want to perpetuate, even though they've existed for these many years, takes away so many jobs. I don't know the exact statistics, but Mr. Chairman, when you look at a job situation without Davis-Bacon rules, you're able to probably employ 1.5 to 2 times as many people with good paying, decent paying jobs and jobs that pay them for their skill level. And what they're doing on the workplace and not being forced to pay these much higher wages despite the job that it happens to be involved in. And I think we ought to be paying for whatever the skilled labor is for that particular job. And if we didn't have these rules and regulations like Davis-Bacon, there'd be a heck of a lot more jobs in this country. We can't afford to leave 16 million people on the sidewalk. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Illinois.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we have run down the end of our time, and I would encourage the gentleman to gentleman will close. Mr. Chairman, the gentleman from Georgia is correct. On an average, this Davis-Bacon wage requirement costs an average of 22% above market wages. That means that the Davis-Bacon Act costs 22% or more on costs for getting projects done, which means fewer projects can get done, which hampers the ability that we have, local governments have, to ensure that contractors and work is done across this country. This amendment saves taxpayers millions of dollars. We heard perhaps $1 billion. It allows for more competition, and I ask my colleagues to support the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Illinois controls the time.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I yield the balance of my time to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Rahal.
Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I guess this is part of the mantra of the majority on this particular bill, do more with less, when actually what we're doing is less with less, because there would be less wages paid to our American workers if this amendment were to be adopted, and there would be less safety provided to our American workers. There would be less health care coverage provided, less pension care coverage, less efficient, and less highly skilled workers if this gentleman's amendment were adopted. So I conclude by urging all of our colleagues to oppose this amendment.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Recorded vote. Gentleman requests recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 21, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment made in order under the rule, pre-printed in the record.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 21, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. LaTourette of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. LaTourette, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Well, I apologize for calling you Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, before I begin my remarks, I would ask unanimous consent that 2 minutes of my 5 minutes be yielded to and controlled by the distinguished ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Costello, to yield time as he should see fit.
Without objection.
I thank the chair. I'm going to be brief in this opening segment. Let me just make this observation. This 17th extension, I believe, of the FAA bill. We haven't had an FAA bill till 2003, and this is going to take it to 2 more years. Because the President has said he won't sign this bill unless this amendment is adopted. The Senate has declared this a non-starter. And so if we want to give fancy speeches, and for those just tuning in around the country, you know, welcome to Wacko Union Night, because this will be our 4th, 5th anti-union vote that has nothing to do with the aviation system. And even on the last amendment, I got to tell you, you can't say it costs jobs and increase costs at the same time. If you hire the same amount of workers for Davis-Bacon and hire two times as many workers, well, the project's going to cost the same. So, I mean, it's that kind of circular argument that's leading this circular firing squad. A good amendment, urge its adoption, and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with points made by my friend from Ohio. The National Mediation Board made the right decision. Incidentally, at the request of 191 members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, after holding many hearings. In the words of Congresswoman Candace Miller, this is not a pro-union or anti-union vote. This is about fairness. I urge a yes vote and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
I rise in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Unfortunately, I have to strongly disagree with my good friend, colleague, the gentleman from Ohio and the gentleman from Illinois on this amendment. What's proposed as fairness is really probably the height of unfairness. We've had 75 years of rule and law in which to organize in the transportation sector, you had to have a majority of all of the individuals that work there, all the people that would be potential members, and a majority of those folks would have to vote in the union, and I have no problem with union representation. The President packed that board, the National Mediation Board, and on a 2-to-1 vote, they changed 75 years of ruling. Now, what's particularly unfair, and the dirty little secret in all this, is that they didn't change it to decertify, to shed the union. They left it So you still have to have all majority plus one of all of the members. So this is not fair by any means. We should allow unionization. We should allow votes of it. But those, again, who are affected, who have to pay the dues, who have to abide by the union rules and regulations that they set, it's not fair. So I wish this was crafted in a different way for fairness, but it's not. So again, they upset 75 years in which it worked very well. In fact, they told me today that under the 75 years, you had a larger number than most recent votes under this rule. I think it's 50% to 70%, something like that. So if you really want to favor unionization in a fair way, let's have it the way it worked for many years and oppose this amendment. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself 15 seconds just to say, I mean, this is a good example of what's going on here. The last amendment was going to repeal Davis-Bacon. That's been around for 80 years. But 80 years is okay, 75 years isn't. That doesn't even make sense in this debate or anywhere else in America. I reserve.
Gentleman from Illinois.
Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to the ranking member, Mr. Rahal.
Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized for
Mr. Chairman, it's very
minutes.
clear that the other body would not accept this amendment if the bill goes over to them with this in it. It's clear that the President of the United States would not accept this amendment because this bill with the current language, because he has already said he'll veto it if it comes to his desk in this way. So I guess the proponents of this particular provision are just wanting to continue to pass extension after extension, thereby threatening airport improvements, threatening to halt airport construction, just as they're threatening to shut down our government. This is not about unions. It's not about increasing union representation. It's about fairness. It's about what's right for the American worker. That's all we're talking about in this particular amendment. And I would yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from California, Mr. Miller.
I thank the
gentleman
gentleman.
from California is recognized for 45 seconds.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise in strong support of this amendment. This amendment really restores democracy to the American workplace, and it restores the American principles of majority vote and majority rule. The decision by the National Mediation Board to begin recognizing election results based upon who actually votes in the election is correct and a long time coming. It is fair and an open process, 60-day comment period and public hearings with 34 witnesses, and their actions were upheld in court. Think of this in our committee. Our rules are a majority of those present and voting. No committee in this Congress would operate under these rules because they would not be able to prevail on any of the votes because people could just stay away and they would be counted. No PTA would operate under these rules. They may have a very large membership. So we ought to restore democracy, protect American workers, and vote for this amendment.
Gentleman from Florida.
Pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrich.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the chairman of TNI for yielding to me, and the language in the bill gets it exactly right, and I rise in strong opposition to this striking amendment. The National Mediation Board, 3 political appointees and a 2-to-1 decision a year ago undid 75 years of law, Railway Labor Act, that simply says that to certify a union, 50% plus 1 of the group has to vote in favor of it. And as the chairman said, the decertification part is a much higher bar. So it has to be a majority plus 1 to decertify. That is totally wrong. The bill has it right. Vote against this striking amendment and vote for fairness and for the American people. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio has 1 3/4 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Florida has 1 1/2 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Illinois' time has expired. Gentleman from Florida.
We have 1 1/2 minutes.
Gentleman has 1 1/2 minutes remaining.
I'd be pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished chair of the Aviation Subcommittee, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Petri.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my colleague for yielding, and I'm just sitting here listening to this debate and people talking about fairness and 75 years. I did a little math. 75 years ago, the Railway Labor Act was enacted, by a very heavily Democratic Congress in the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration. And now we're told that they were unfair and unkind and so on to organized labor. This is something that was passed by the Congress. The law, the National Labor Relations Act, has always until now, for 75 years, been interpreted to mean that a majority of those affected had to vote to certify a union. I think if we want to change it, if our sense of what's fair has changed over the last 75 years, 75 years, and it has in other areas, it should be done by act of Congress and not by by the National Labor Relations Board the National Mediation Board in this fashion. It clearly upsets a balance that was struck and has served us well for several generations.
Gentleman from Florida has 1/2 minute remaining. Gentleman from Ohio. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 3/4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listen, when people read this record, they really need to know what this amendment's about, what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that the rule that the MICA bill repeals is that if you have 100 people that work for a company and you have an election and 70 of them show up and 65 of them vote to certify a union, the union loses. I mean, because you don't get 50 plus the universe. Now, in our example, members of Congress, where voter turnout's about 49% in the last election, I got 200,000 registered voters in my district. 100,000 show up. I get 70,000. I'm champagne, you know, great honey, we won another one, you know, we fooled them again. Well, I would lose 130 to 70 because the rule that's been in place since 1935, and again, I'm saddened that folks, maybe you have to have an even number to be bad law, but good law is you know, something that's only 75 years, but that's just nuts. I mean, that is crazy. And, you know, 75 years, I'm going to steal from my friend, Mr. Costello, who's the co-sponsor of this amendment. You know, when the Constitution was framed, who could vote in this country? White guys who own land. You know, and if you ask them 75 years later, they said, man, I can't believe they changed that. That's unbelievable. Or how about women? Another 100 years, women couldn't vote in this country. If you ask some guys today, said, the country really got screwed up when you gave women the right to vote. That is a non sequitur. It's a false argument. And the best proof is right here in this House of Representatives. When the old majority was on their way out, and we all know they didn't do anything, when they're on their way out, we needed to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government open until March the 4th. Well, you know what? 75 of our members went home for Christmas. So that CR to keep the government open passed 193 to 165. If the MICA rule is kept in place, the government would have shut down and we would have lost that vote 193 to 240. Please pass the amendment.
Gentleman from Florida has 30 seconds remaining.
In closing, the President has threatened to veto this legislation because of the provision that we have. I can see why, because he packed the board. He packed the board, and on a 2-to-1 vote, they overrode a provision that was put in by FDR, confirmed by Truman and Carter and others. And then we heard about this is an assault on democracy. Well, folks, have you ever seen one-way democracy? So the vote going in is fixed, but the vote going out is left the same. So please, folks, this is not the case. I urge a no vote on this amendment.
Fired. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Florida.
On that, I request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 22 printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment. It's at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 22, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Graves of Missouri.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is an amendment that deals with a TFR, temporary flight restriction, that complicates things at the air show in Cleveland. There's actually several air shows that this is a problem with, but the Cleveland Air Show happens to be the worst one. The reason I am doing it is because I do a lot of air shows and fly in a lot of air shows, and I'm intimately familiar with how the TFRs work. Right now, and what the problem we've had in the past is when the Cleveland Indians play at, which is Jacobs Field, if they have a stadium TFR right now, which is that temporary flight restriction, for any stadium with a game going on, whether it's football, baseball, whatever, that TFR is 3.5 miles in radius and 3,000 feet deep. Well, with the airport so close to the stadium, if there's a rain game or a rain delay game that is postponed and rescheduled, and you have the air show at Cleveland, which is one of the most historic air shows around the country, it completely eliminates that air show. The irony is that the stadium there, the Cleveland Indians Stadium, only seats 43,000 people, and there's 90,000 people at the air show. So it creates a problem. What I'm trying to do is clarify and allow the air show to go on when there's a game going on. Now, here's the irony. This is the most important part. There is what we call an air show TFR, temporary flight restriction. It's more restrictive than a stadium TFR is. In fact, an air show flight restriction is 5 miles in radius and it's 12,000 feet deep. It completely encompasses the stadium TFR. So if there's a game going on same time as an air show, they are still going to be completely protected, and it's going to be completely encompassed within that TFR, and they can both proceed. If for some reason the air show ends early and the game's still going on, then it'll immediately revert back to the stadium TFR, and everybody is happy, and we move forward. There is never a single point in time when there is no protection over that stadium, and it's always been a problem, and we're just trying to clarify so they can continue, the people of Cleveland can continue to do the air show.
I'll yield.
I would yield.
Yes, we've reviewed the amendment on this side, feel it's a limited and a well-reasoned exception to the rule, and therefore I would support the amendment and urge a yes vote.
Mr. Chairman, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of the time.
How much time do I have? Can I inquire?
Gentleman has 2.5 minutes
okay.
remaining. Hussek's time in opposition.
I don't know whether I'm in opposition or not, but I'm asking to have a consent to claim the time in opposition.
Is there objection? Hearing none, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich.
Gentleman is recognized.
I want to thank Mr. Rahal.
How much time did the gentleman yield?
2 minutes.
I want to thank the gentleman. Thank you very much. As a congressman from the Cleveland area, I want to thank Mr. Graves for pointing out the importance of making this change so that we can continue to have the air show at the same time that we have these major sports events going on. What most people may not understand, in Cleveland we have a lakefront airport that's a relatively short distance from our football stadium, and it's also not that far away from our baseball stadium. So it's important for this great event, which is the air show, to be able to get the cooperation from all federal authorities so we can proceed with it. This is one of the major events of the end of summer in Cleveland, and we're very proud of the air show. It's a Cleveland tradition that goes back many, many years, and I would hope to have the support of members of both sides of the aisle. And I want to thank my good friend for helping to take the initiative on this, because I think this is something that hopefully we'll all be able to agree on. I yield back to the gentleman from West Virginia.
Gentleman from Missouri. Gentleman from Missouri has 2.5 minutes remaining.
On close.
Reserve.
I don't have anybody else, so I can close.
Okay, reserve.
Well, Mr. Chairman, this is, again, and I'm going to say this for the sake of, I know there's a lot of confusion out there, and I hope there's staff listening and there are members listening in their offices. Again, this is, the Cleveland Air Show, as was pointed out by the gentleman from Ohio, is, I fly a lot of air shows, and this is one of my favorite air shows, and it's an extraordinarily historic aviation community because I used to be home to the Cleveland Air Races. And again, this never at any time lessens security one bit. In fact, it makes security stronger because the TFR around an air show is even tighter than a normal TFR. It's bigger, it's deeper, and you can't even turn a prop without getting permission during an air show while it's going on. So there will never, ever be a time that this stadium is not underneath the TFR. I'm not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. I'm being straight up on this thing. It's a problem, and we need to fix it, so there's no reason why two events can't go on at the same time if that ever is a problem, and it has been in the past. We just don't want it to be in the future.
Would gentleman yield for a question? I'm just wondering if the gentleman has consulted with TSA or Department of Homeland Security or FBI, the various agencies that were concerned about safety at such sports events following 9/11, and for which many of the stadiums and sponsors of these sports events have instituted and spent millions of dollars in safety, who have legitimate concerns that one attack may make it off or not.
We did not contact the FBI, but we did contact the FBI and Homeland Security. Homeland Security did not get a response back to us. However, and I provided to the ranking member of the Aviation Subcommittee the response from the FAA. They took no position. And we still leave that authority with them. They can still, if they think it needs to be more restrictive, they can do that. So, I didn't want to take that completely away. I think probably the biggest problem is I think the sports authorities didn't realize there are TFRs associated with an air show, and which are actually more restrictive and bigger. So the best thing you could do is have an air show next to your game. You're going to have a better TFR, I guess. The irony is.
Because the gentleman is aware of a letter then we've received from the major sports organizations, Major League Baseball and National Football League, the NCAA, expressing their opposition to your amendment.
And yes, and again, I think it's just simply because they don't realize there's still a TFR there. And I probably should have done a better job of explaining that, and if in the future it becomes a problem, I want there to be good security. I'd be more than willing to work something out.
Gentleman from Missouri's time has expired. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I just heard what I was looking for in the gentleman's concluding comments there, that he was willing to work with anybody that has these legitimate safety concerns
would the gentleman
in
yield?
order to make sure that everything is clear on this and going forward.
I would be pleased to work with both of those gentlemen to make sure that we cover all the safety concerns that are expressed. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Missouri. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 23, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 23, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Waxman of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, Santa Monica Airport is a unique general aviation facility located in my congressional district. Each end of the bidirectional runway is abutted by steep hills, public streets, and densely populated neighborhoods with homes as close as 250 feet. The airport has no runway safety areas. If a plane overshot the runway or failed to lift off upon departure, it could easily land in the neighborhood. The amendment I offer today is simple and straightforward. It urges the FAA to continue its discussion with the City of Santa Monica to identify a meaningful solution to address serious safety concerns at the Santa Monica Airport. For nearly a decade, I've joined the community, the City of Santa Monica, and the airport administration to push the FAA to address this serious safety gap. While the FAA has had discussions with the city and presented a runway safety proposal, its response has simply fallen short. The FAA has acknowledged that its proposal is both insufficient to stop larger jets from an overrun and inadequate to prevent overshoots involving smaller planes. My constituents and the pilots and passengers who use Santa Monica Airport deserve better. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Would the gentleman?
I'd be pleased to yield, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
First, I have no objection to the amendment. And the sense of Congress, the gentleman from California offers that FAA should enter into discussions with the Santa Monica Airport for the purpose of runway safety are justified. This is a safety issue. It's important that we address it. And from our side, I would support it.
Thank the chairman. Pleased to yield to the ranking member of the committee.
I thank the gentleman from California for bringing this to our attention and bringing his amendment to the floor, and has our total support as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Does any member claim time in opposition? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 24, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 24, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Schuster of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, and a member opposed. Deed for control, 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to offer an amendment, and this amendment is composed of two parts, both of which deal with making improvements to the process of issuing Federal Aviation Administration regulations. The amendment is an effort to improve rulemaking at the FAA by requiring the agency to meet fundamental rulemaking principles. Directing the FAA to meet these standards will ensure that regulations protect the critical importance of aviation safety while also considering issues of economic competitiveness. First part is one size does not fit all. Part of the amendment requires the FAA to recognize that the United States aviation industry is composed of a variety of different segments with different operating characteristics. Therefore, before proposing or issuing a regulation, the FAA administrator must analyze the different industry segments and tailor any regulations to the characteristics of separate segments. The definition of industry segments is left to the administrator. The FAA Administrator, Randy Babbitt, has pointed out that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. In 2009, Administrator Babbitt said in rulemaking, it not only does it not one-size-fit-all, but it's unsafe to think it can. This amendment attempts to fulfill that objective. The second part fulfills President Obama's goals of regulatory reform. The second part ensures that the proposed regulations are not overly burdensome or cumbersome by requiring the FAA to conduct rulemakings in accordance with certain principles. First, a reasoned cost and benefit analysis. Second, an assessment of the impact on the economy. And a third, and extremely important, that the regulation is based on the best available science and technical information. Let me be clear that my intent is not to single out or gut any particular regulation or proposed regulation. This amendment does not define industry segments. We allow the FAA Administrator to interpret and appropriately define what industry segments are. It does not require that the cost-benefits analysis be the reason for a rule. It's a reasoned analysis. Additionally, the amendment is not retroactive. And finally, I understand that there may be concerns that the language could apply to ongoing rulemakings. That's not my intent for this amendment to apply to ongoing rulemakings, such as those regarding pilot, flight, and duty time. The Transportation Committee has worked hard to address the important safety concerns in a bipartisan manner, and if there are concerns with the language, we certainly want to make sure we clear that up. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I rise in strong opposition to my friend's amendment, and this amendment would impose new legislative requirements on the FAA's ability amendment, and this amendment would impose new legislative requirements on the FAA's ability to propose or issue regulations. Many of the proposed requirements are redundant and are already required by existing law and executive orders. For example, the FAA is already required to consider the cost and benefits of regulations and to base its regulation on scientific and technical information. Other requirements, such as forcing the FAA to tailor regulations for each industry segment, could seriously undermine efforts to achieve one level of safety in aviation and delay important safety improvements. Mr. Chairman, last Congress, the House Aviation Subcommittee conducted extensive aviation safety oversight, including numerous hearings stemming from the February 2009 Colgan Flight 3407 tragedy. These hearings did not reveal a pattern of arbitrary or draconian rules imposed by the FAA on the aviation industry. Rather, they revealed a pattern of industry's resistance to proposed safety regulations, many of which resulted from extensive accident investigations and which nonetheless languished for years. The Flight 3407 families who tragically lost their loved ones 2 years ago in Buffalo, New York, were instrumental in the adoption of H.R. 5900, and they continue to monitor the implementation of this important law, holding industry's feet and the FAA's feet to the fire. They are opposed to this amendment because they are also concerned about the adverse impact it would have on the current FAA rulemaking on pilot fatigue. Earlier today, Captain Sully Sullenberger, the former U.S. air captain who safely landed in the Hudson River 2 years ago after a flock of geese damaged both his plane's engines, said he was extremely concerned that the Schuster Amendment will prevent critical safety regulations from being implemented. This amendment is not needed. It purports to fix a system that is not broken. At best, it's redundant. At worst, it will delay necessary rulemakings, including those on 84 open NTSB recommendations to the detriment of the flying public. Mr. Chairman, I strongly oppose the gentleman's amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Can I inquire how much time is remaining?
Gentleman has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Yield
With the gentleman yield, I understand this amendment has stirred a certain amount of controversy. I've worked with Chairman Costello on the underlying bill that seeks to improve safety and deal with the tragedy that caused the Colgan crash. We've been talking to the FAA. And so there's a disagreement about the impact of this amendment, frankly, because they indicate that this is more or less in line with their understanding of the underlying law and the procedures they intend to follow going forward, and really merely clarifies it. And if that's the gentleman's intent, it seems reasonable that one take into account different circumstances to maximize safety under changing conditions in different segments of the aviation industry. I certainly do not favor weakening safety, but I do favor strengthening it in relation to differing circumstances that exist, whether if it's emergency aviation or if it's military aviation or commuter aviation or general aviation. There are some factors that may be reasonable to take into account to maximize safety. I understand or believe that that's the author's intention, though others clearly differ with me at this point.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman's comments, and that's my intent. And in fact, the executive order, which does have some of this already in it, the executive order cannot have judicial review, so this will strengthen the position for people to have a judicial review to be able to enforce it. Again, currently, the executive order doesn't have that in it, so I believe this is going to strengthen it. I want safety. Randy Babbitt, who is now the FAA administrator and the former president of ALPA, the Airline Pilots Association, he has said one size fits all, doesn't fit all. So again, I think this is going to strengthen the position as we move forward with these rulings, and so I would urge the gentleman to, if there's something we can do to clear this up a little bit, I'm happy to listen to him.
Gentleman reserve the balance of his time.
I reserve the balance of my time, yes.
Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, there is no question, at least from legal counsel that we have talked to, that it would absolutely affect current regulations and those that are pending right now under consideration. So I would ask the gentleman, I believe I understand his intent, if he would consider withdrawing the amendment, working with the chairman of the full committee and the subcommittee, myself and Mr. Rahal, as we go into conference. Well, I yield to the gentleman for an answer.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman. That is my intent, is to strengthen this. Again, I think this does strengthen the law because it will give it to judicial review, and so at this point I'm not willing to withdraw the amendment.
I'm sorry, you're not willing to withdraw?
I'm not going to withdraw the amendment. I appreciate it.
I thank the gentleman, and we continue to strongly oppose the gentleman's amendment, and I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
The gentleman's closed, and
has 15 seconds remaining. Gentleman from Pennsylvania has 15 seconds remaining.
Again, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I believe we're going to strengthen the rulemaking process and make the skies and aviation travel even safer than it is today. So I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Illinois has 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, we strongly oppose the amendment. We believe that it will add additional red tape, and there is no evidence at all that the FAA regulations are history. In fact, favor anyone other than there has been a reluctance on the part of the industry to comply with regulations, and what this will do is drag it out even further and have a negative effect on those pending regulations as well as the existing ones. So we continue to oppose, and I will be happy to work with the gentleman to try and prove. I know that he has good intentions, and I'd be happy to work with him, but we'll continue to oppose and urge a no vote and yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Illinois.
Ask for the yeas and nays.
Gentleman requests a recorded vote.
I do.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania will be postponed.
It is now in order to consider amendment number 25, printed in House Report 112-46.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 25, printed in the House Report number 112-46, offered by Ms. Moore of Wisconsin.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Wisconsin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I yield myself as much time as I may consume. My amendment is fairly straightforward. We all understand that small businesses are critical to the economic vitality of our communities and of the nation. Small businesses, however, face many obstacles in trying to win federal contracts, especially for transportation and infrastructure projects. For certain small businesses, those led by minorities, women, and veterans, the barriers to competing for federally funded contracts is even steeper. And for many years now, federal transportation legislation has included language to help these businesses even get into the door, much less compete for and win these contracts. I would submit to you that this is a very non-controversial. There are no quotas. There's no spending. It simply requires, I'll yield.
I would thank my colleague from Wisconsin for yielding, and if I might take this occasion to be one of the first to wish her a happy birthday. A big milestone is coming up very shortly, and I congratulate you on reaching it. And we have reviewed your amendment on this side of the aisle, and we agree with you, feel it is an important amendment, and support it.
Well, I thank you, gentlemen from Wisconsin. This bill, as I understand it, will authorize $47.5 billion over the next 4 years to improve our nation's aviation system. And we all want small businesses to be able to fairly compete for that piece of the pie, because we know they can. I would like to yield time to the ranking member.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding time, and I commend her for her diligent work on this issue, for her amendment, bringing it to the floor of the House. It's all about fairness, and rise in support as well.
Thank you. I will yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. Does any member seek time in opposition? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Wisconsin. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 26, printed in House Report 11246. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment. It's at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 26, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Graves of Missouri.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of an amendment which I call the Herrick language, simply for the gentleman who brought the language to me and a restorer of old aircraft. But this amendment requires the FAA to preserve original aircraft engineering data in the agency's possession. If you kind of think of this as blueprints of our nation's very earliest aircraft, and it extends for a time from 1927 to 1939, 1927 being the very first type certificate that was ever issued by the CAA at that time, FAA now. Right now, the FAA is currently authorized to destroy that data. And in my opinion, this destruction represents the disappearance of very detailed and documented documentation surrounding the golden age of aviation. In some cases, this data is converted to a CD, and what happens is, or it's converted digitally, what happens is the FAA policy then requires the agency to destroy the original documents. In a world of aviation, to those of us who are very close to aviation, this would be comparable to making a copy of the Declaration of Independence and then destroying the original. It is unclear how much of this original data exists, which is all the more reason why I think we need to preserve it, to find out how much is there. What my amendment does simply is it requires the FAA to preserve original aircraft engineering data in the agency's possession for aircraft from 1927 to 1939. It requires the FAA to revise the order which provides them authority to destroy this data, and the revision would prohibit such destruction. And it makes the documentation to be preserved under this Act available to the public upon a Freedom of Information Act request, subject to a prohibition on using the documents for commercial purposes. I would urge my colleagues to support